On the morning of August 15, 1975, at exactly 11:23 a.m., a phone call was placed to the Marple Police Department. The caller, David Zandstra, a minister who also oversaw a summer Bible camp, delivered a distressing report. An 8-year-old girl named Gretchen Harrington was missing. Gretchen had left her home in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, intending to walk to the camp, which was less than half a mile away. However, she never made it. A frantic search for Gretchen began immediately, but it turned up no leads. 2 months later, on October 14, 1975, her skeletal remains were discovered in nearby Ridley Creek State Park. This devastating revelation left the community in shock and confusion, with the crime still unsolved. What had happened to Gretchen after she set off for the summer Bible camp? Would the truth surrounding Gretchen's disappearance and death ever emerge? Today's case takes us to Marble Township in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which had a population of over 23,000 as of 2015. Marble Township features several interesting attractions, such as the Broomall Fields and Marble Gardens. It is generally a safe place to live. With a crime rate below the national average, its crime score of 0.17 positions it as one of Pennsylvania's safest towns. This is where Gretchen Harrington's story began. On June 13, 1967, she was born to Harold Boyd Harrington and Ina Harrington. At the time, her father Harold served as a minister at a Presbyterian church. In addition to her parents, Gretchen had 2 older sisters named Zoe and Harriet. Gretchen's family described her as a person who radiated kindness and had a sweet and gentle nature. By 1975, at the age of 8, Gretchen was attending 2nd grade at Delaware County Christian School in Newtown Square. Everything appeared to be going well for Gretchen and her family until a tragic event disrupted their lives. On the morning of August 15, 1975, Gretchen left home to attend a summer Bible camp program. This camp had 2 locations. The first was Trinity Church Chapel Christian Reformed Church, where a man named David Zandstra served as a pastor. The second location was the Reformed Presbyterian Church, where Gretchen's father, Harold, was the pastor. The Bible camp activities took place in the morning at the first church, and afterwards, David would transport the children to the second church. The Harrington and Zandstra families were well acquainted with each other. They lived nearby, and both fathers worked as pastors, while both mothers played the traditional role of a pastor's wife. In fact, one of Zandstra's daughters was Gretchen's best friend. Gretchen's journey that day was unusual. Typically, she would be walking to the summer Bible camp program with her 2 sisters, 12-year-old Zoe and 11-year-old Harriet. It was their daily routine. However, on that particular day, their mother Ina had just given birth to a baby named Jessica and was bringing the newborn home. Zoe and Harriet chose to stay back and await their return. Despite this change in routine, Harold, Gretchen's father, encouraged her to go to the summer Bible camp program to maintain her perfect attendance record, and so Gretchen embarked on the walk alone, as her father bid her farewell. It was just past 9 a.m. when she began her stroll up the hill towards Trinity. Harold kept a watchful eye on her as she proceeded along Lawrence Road. Little did he know that once she was out of his sight, it would mark the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. In the 1970s, in a peaceful suburban place like Marple, it was entirely normal to see children walking alone on sunny summer days. The idea of danger didn't even cross people's minds. This was a time when kids really played until late in the evening. They roamed the streets, ventured into the woods, and even cooled off at Darby Creek, which flowed behind Gretchen's house, without any worries. Children would walk to their friends' houses, blocks away without any aid of cell phones or GPS watches to keep them connected to their parents. Marple was simply an exceptionally safe place. That's precisely why many longtime Philadelphians chose to move there in the 1960s. Gretchen was supposed to be at Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church by 9:30 a.m., but she didn't arrive as scheduled. The first inkling that something was amiss came when Harold noticed her absence around 11 a.m. A group of Gretchen's friends had come to the front door of their residence, looking for her. Worried and unable to locate Gretchen within the classes or nearby, Harold took immediate action. He phoned the Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church and spoke with Maggie Zandstra, David's wife, in an attempt to determine his daughter's whereabouts. However, he was told she hadn't been seen. Following this, the Marple Township Police Department was contacted by David, and Gretchen was formally reported as missing. Gretchen's disappearance sent shock waves through Broomall in Marple Township. By the following day, August 16, 1975, an extensive search effort involving 100 of people was underway to find her. This included volunteer firefighters and K-9 units, who scoured both sides of the creek, fields, and wooded areas. A Pennsylvania State Police helicopter continuously scanned the area from above. However, on August 17, 1975, just 2 days after Gretchen went missing, the police had to call off the large-scale search operation because they had very little information to work with. The police chief, Daniel Hennessy, candidly admitted to a local newspaper that they had no clues regarding her whereabouts. This situation threw the entire town into a state of panic, shaking the community's sense of security to its core. In response, friends and family members started distributing flyers to passing motorists in the area. These flyers featured Gretchen's most recent school photo, showcasing her with a missing tooth and a cheerful childlike grin. The absence of information led to a surge in speculation and countless unanswered questions. Did she run away? Did she accidentally drown in the creek? Could a stranger have abducted her? Or was it someone she knew? The mystery surrounding Gretchen's disappearance left everyone deeply concerned and bewildered. In the days that followed after Gretchen vanished, the police worked to gather information and understand the events surrounding her disappearance. One of their key interviews took place on August 19th when they spoke with David. During this conversation, David disclosed that he had indeed transported a group of children to the church on the day Gretchen disappeared. However, he stated that he had not seen her on that particular day. As August turned into September, Gretchen's sisters, Zoe and Harriet Harrington, resumed attending Delaware County Christian School. However, their fellow students found it difficult to approach them or engage in conversation, unsure of what to say in the face of such a heart-wrenching situation. When traditional investigative methods yielded no results, the police decided to pursue an unconventional avenue in their search for Gretchen. They turned to the assistance of a psychic named Judith Richardson Hames. Judith was known for using her psychic abilities to aid law enforcement in solving nearly 100 criminal cases, particularly those involving missing children. In September 1975, Judith sat down with police officers and she made a prediction that she herself hoped would prove to be incorrect. According to her psychic insights, she believed that Gretchen was dead. A month later, on October 14, 1975, a jogger exploring Ridley Creek State Park stumbled upon a decaying body hidden in the forest. Initially unsure of what he had come across, his uncertainty vanished when he noticed a human fingernail. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the jogger promptly contacted the police. Gretchen's parents examined the distinctive clothing discovered with the remains, and they confirmed it was hers. Subsequently, the medical examiner matched the body to Gretchen using dental records. The tragic conclusion was that Gretchen's death had resulted from homicide. The forensic examination revealed that her skull had sustained multiple fractures, indicating a severe beating. Although the police initially suspected abuse, the autopsy did not yield any concrete evidence to support this hypothesis. On Sunday, October 19, 1975, just a few days after Gretchen's body was discovered, her father, Harold, stood at the pulpit and delivered a deeply emotional sermon. In his heart-wrenching address, he spoke of Gretchen's faith in Christ. He pointed out that she was now free from this world, but her murderer remained bound by their terrible actions. Gretchen's funeral was a somber event, and David officiated the service for the 8-year-old. Following the ceremony, she was laid to rest in Meridian Line Cemetery, situated in Johannesburg, Michigan, USA. Meanwhile, the discovery of Gretchen's body in the woods ignited renewed fervor for the investigation. Witnesses began to step forward, sharing accounts of various individuals they had seen in the vicinity where Gretchen's body was found. These eyewitness reports provided descriptions of men who had been in the area. As a result, the police received a flood of tips from the community, with some seeming more promising than others, while others turned out to be unrelated or unhelpful in the pursuit of justice. investigators examined a range of potential suspects, even scrutinizing individuals with prior criminal records residing in the vicinity. Despite their efforts, no significant leads emerged, and the evidence box stored at Marple Township Police Department headquarters began to gather dust. This box contained a trove of materials, including reel-to-reel tape interviews, photographs, and memoranda, all relevant to the case, but the lack of progress had it sitting idle. As time passed, the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance grew cold. Occasionally during roll call meetings, or when a detective had a spare moment in an otherwise uneventful week, they would revisit the case. They would look through the file, hoping to spot something they had missed before. But each time, it seemed like a futile effort. The leads always led to dead ends, leaving them frustrated and without any breakthroughs in the case. For many decades, there were no developments in the case. The original detectives, who had been working on Gretchen's disappearance, had either passed away or retired. However, in the fall of 2022, there was a significant turn of events. A woman whose name was not released to the public reached out to the Marple Police Department, expressing her desire to discuss Gretchen's disappearance and murder. At the time, Nick Coffin, a sergeant, had taken charge of Gretchen's cold case. Therefore, when this woman contacted the Marple police, her message was directed to Coffin's phone. The woman informed Coffin that she believed she had information about who might have been responsible for Gretchen's tragic fate. She also mentioned an attempted kidnapping incident that had occurred around the same time, raising suspicions of a possible connection. This unexpected contact rekindled hope for solving the long-standing mystery surrounding Gretchen's disappearance and murder. On January 2, 2023, state troopers arranged an interview with the woman identified only by her initials, SF, denoting her as a confidential informant. This interview would prove to be a momentous breakthrough in a cold case that had remained unresolved for nearly 5 decades. According to SF, she had been a schoolmate of Gretchen and one of her sisters, Zoe. SF also disclosed to investigators that she had been friends with David Zandstra's daughters and frequently visited the Zandstra residence, even staying overnight on occasions. During one of these sleepovers, when she was 10 years old, SF recounted awakening in the middle of the night to find David inappropriately touching her. Frightened by this disturbing behavior, she shifted her position and prompted David to hastily exit the room. Shockingly, this inappropriate touching occurred again the following night. In the morning when the girls awoke, SF decided to confide in David's daughter about her father's unsettling actions. To her astonishment, the daughter responded with something along the lines of, "He does that sometimes." Over time, SF mustered the courage to share this distressing experience with her parents. Shortly after Gretchen's disappearance, the Zandstra family relocated to Plano, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, in response to the situation. During her interview, SF also shared with state police information about another child in their neighborhood, a girl named Holly, whom she considered a friend. According to her, someone had made an attempt to abduct Holly. As the conversation unfolded, SF presented the investigators with a diary she had kept during her childhood. In a specific diary entry dated September 15, 1975, she had written that a man had tried to kidnap Holly twice. In the diary, she went on to express her suspicion that this man, whom she referred to as Mr. Z, might be the one responsible for Gretchen's kidnapping. Mr. Z was her way of referring to David. This revelation from SF added a significant layer to the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance and murder. The interview with SF and her diary entry motivated investigators to locate 83-year-old David, who was now residing in Marietta, situated northwest of Atlanta, Georgia. On July 17, 2023, investigators conducted an interview with David at the Cobb County Police Headquarters in Marietta. This interview was carried out by 2 Pennsylvania troopers, Andrew Martin and Eugene Trey. The conversation started with a somewhat friendly tone. In the beginning, David initially denied having encountered Gretchen on the day she disappeared. However, the situation took a different turn when the police informed David about the allegations of assault made by a woman who had documented her experiences in the diary. As the conversation progressed, David eventually broke down and confessed to something profoundly disturbing. David recounted to the police that he had observed Gretchen walking towards the church that morning. He claimed that he offered her a ride in his green AMC Rambler station wagon, and she accepted, as she had no reason to decline the offer. However, contrary to taking her to church as promised, David admitted to investigators that he drove Gretchen to a nearby wooded area. There he parked the car and instructed Gretchen to undress, but she refused. Following this, he struck Gretchen with his fist, resulting in her suffering head injuries and bleeding. David then admitted that hearing Gretchen was dead, he tried to conceal her partially unclothed body with sticks before leaving the area. This shocking revelation left detectives stunned as they processed the horrifying details of what David had confessed to. In the wake of this shocking revelation, David was arrested and faced a slew of serious charges, including criminal homicide and first-degree murder, as a result of his confession regarding Gretchen. While David's confession provided some closure concerning Gretchen's fate, it also raised a disconcerting question with ramifications that reached far and wide. Could this man, who had openly admitted to killing one girl and harming others, have additional victims? Before relocating to Marple, David had served as a pastor at a now-closed church in Flanders, New Jersey for several years. During his time at Trinity, he had been an outspoken advocate against the inclusion of education about sexuality in the local school district's curriculum. Less than a year after the discovery of Gretchen's remains, he moved his family to a church in Plano, Texas, just outside Dallas, where he led the congregation for 7 years. Following this, David's pastoral journey took him to the Living Faith Community Church in San Diego. His final pastoral assignment was in Fairfield, California, from which he retired in 2005, at the age of 65. Authorities were aware that this lengthy period of leadership provided him with considerable influence and access to young and vulnerable individuals. This left them with questions about the potential extent of his actions during these years. The Marple community had at long last received some of the answers it sought for decades, but the shocking turn of events did not bring peace to many residents. It had been far more comforting to believe that an outsider, a disturbed criminal, had committed this heinous act. A person who randomly entered the town, abducted a young girl, and then vanished as swiftly as they arrived. However, the perpetrator was not an outsider, but rather a respected member of their own community. It was a religious leader, member of their own community. It was a religious leader, a man with a wife and young daughters of his own. This further shattered the sense of security within the community. In the aftermath of all this, Gretchen's family issued a statement. In it, they expressed their gratitude to law enforcement officials for their ongoing dedication to the case. They also conveyed their hope that the individual responsible for Gretchen's tragic murder would be held accountable. Following David's arrest, his legal team initially contested an extradition process. However, prosecutors led by Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer sought assistance from Governor Josh Shapiro's office to facilitate the return of the confessed perpetrator to Pennsylvania. David is presently under investigation for potential instances of abuse beyond this case. Additionally, investigators took a DNA sample from David, which could prove valuable in a broader context, aiding in the investigation of other missing persons, as well as cases involving assault and murder nationwide. As we conclude this harrowing case, one can't help but reflect on the complexities and twists that unfolded over the years. What challenges lie ahead of Gretchen's family as they seek closure and healing after all these years? And what about David, the perpetrator? What kind of justice do you think he should face for his actions? And how will his arrest impact other potential cases of abuse? Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. Virginia Freeman, known as Ginger, was an outgoing and charismatic woman with a vibrant personality. Always wearing a smile, she thrived in her role as a real estate agent, a career that suited her well due to her ability to connect with a diverse range of clients. Her passion for real estate was evident. According to her coworkers, her eyes would light up whenever she discussed the nuances of the industry. In 1981, The 40-year-old Ginger was employed at Real Estate Mart in Bryan, Texas. At that time, all the agents there were women. She lived with her husband Charles in nearby College Station, Texas. Their son, Brad, was 11, and their daughter, Betsy, was 14. Family was everything to Ginger. Some of her colleagues mistakenly believed she worked part-time instead of full-time, as her diligence and efficiency allowed her to leave the office earlier than most. She worked tirelessly to carve out more time for her children, structuring her demanding schedule around their needs and making sure she was home when they returned from school. An active individual, Ginger loved the outdoors and frequently went hiking and backpacking with her family. In her limited free time, away from work and family, she dedicated herself to volunteering. Ginger was deeply involved in her church, the Girl Scouts, and the American Red Cross. Her passion for nature inspired her to create engaging outdoor activities for the Girl Scouts. Additionally, she volunteered at Texas A&M University, assisting international students in adapting to life in the U.S. On December 1, 1981, Ginger had plans for a dinner out with her husband and 2 friends. However, around 3 o'clock that afternoon, a call came into her office. A man, described as having a country-sounding accent, said he had $73,000 in cash he wanted to use to purchase a home that was for sale on Greens Prairie Road. At the time, the home was on a secluded road in a rural section of College Station. Not wanting to miss out on a cash sale, which could generally be completed more quickly and easily than a finance sale, Ginger agreed to meet the caller at the property to show him the house. On her way, she stopped at home to see her children. She told them where she was going and that she would be back home in time for dinner. Ginger did not arrive home in time to go to the dinner. Around 7 p.m., her worried husband Charles reported her missing. He also called her office and got the address of the home Ginger had been going to show the potential buyer. He and the husband of one of Ginger's co-workers went out to search for her, starting out at the home she had been going to show that afternoon. Behind the remote home, they discovered Ginger's body. Ginger had been struck in the head with a blunt object, believed to be a 4.5-pound slab of concrete. She had been strangled with enough force that her neck was broken and she had been stabbed in the neck 11 times. A later examination would determine that she had been sexually assaulted. Her time of death was placed at approximately 3:30 p.m., just a half hour after Ginger received the phone call that brought her to the property. The home on the property was still locked, indicating that Ginger was most likely attacked as soon as she arrived to the home. Marks dug into the dirt at the scene illustrated how fiercely Ginger had fought for her life. 2 days after the murder, a group of local real estate agents announced that they were collectively offering a $10,000 reward for information in the case. More than 900 people were in attendance at Ginger's funeral on December 4, 1981. In February of 1982, a memorial fund was established in Ginger's name to help assist international students and their families when they arrived in Texas. On May 2, 1982, the Girl Scouts of Central Texas dedicated a secluded plot of land at their campground in Bryan, Camp Howdy, to Ginger's memory. The land was named the Ginger Freeman Primitive Area and is where young campers are taught to set up their campsites. Bo Ward, one of Ginger's co-workers at the Real Estate Mart, would go on to use Ginger's story to teach new real estate agents about how to keep themselves safe while showing homes, particularly to clients they had not previously met. Even as decades passed after Ginger's murder, Bo could never bring herself to sell a home in the area where Ginger was killed. The early investigation Ginger's murder. Even as years passed after the murder, authorities did not give up on the investigation. Several known serial killers, including Coral Eugene Watts and Henry Lee Lucas, were interviewed as part of the investigation but ultimately ruled out as suspects. More than 6 leads were pursued over the years, with investigators traveling all over the United States to look into potential suspects. Witnesses were hypnotized in hopes of them remembering new details. While DNA testing was not available to law enforcement at the time of Ginger's murder, investigator Dick Gullidge had the foresight to have Ginger's hands covered with plastic bags at the crime scene. He coordinated with the medical examiner's office to make sure that Ginger's fingernails and any material under them were preserved. Decades later, Testing would show that the killer's DNA had been deposited under Ginger's fingernails as she tried to fight him off. The DNA would prove to be crucial evidence once technology advanced to the point where investigators could properly utilize it. Evidence from the case was submitted for DNA testing in 1997, and a DNA profile was developed. Over the years, there was no match to it found in criminal databases or to any of the numerous suspects authorities collected DNA samples from. A major break in the case came in early 2017 when the television program National Geographic Explorer offered to pay for advanced DNA analysis in the case in exchange for investigators' cooperation in filming a segment about Ginger's murder. The DNA testing in question was Snapshot, a forensic analysis program developed by Parabon Nanolabs. The program predicts certain physical features, like hair color and eye color, an individual is likely to have based on their DNA profile and generates images of what they may look like. The analysis 17 with the hope that a member of the public would come forward identifying a man who resembled the man in the images who could be investigated as a potential suspect. It would be Parabon's further work with the department that would ultimately help close the case. However, in June of 2018, Sheriff Kirk held another press conference, this time announcing that Parabon had used genetic genealogy to provide clear and convincing evidence that Ginger's killer was James Otto Earhart. Earhart could not be arrested and tried in connection with her murder, however, as he had been executed by the state of Texas on August 11, 1999. Earhart had been sentenced to death after being convicted of capital murder for the 1987 murder of 9-year-old Candy Kirtland. Candy was a 4th grade student at Crockett Elementary School in Bryan, Texas. She went missing on May 12, 1987 after being dropped off by her school bus near her home. Her body, still in the clothes she had been wearing the day she went missing, was discovered hidden under debris in a wooded area off of a dirt road in Bryan. Her arms had been bound behind her back with electrical cord, and she had been shot once in the back of her head. Earhart had been in Candy's neighborhood recently, inquiring about a paint gun that had been offered for sale in a newspaper ad. Witnesses saw him and his vehicle near Candy's home the day she went missing. He was taken into custody in connection to Candy's disappearance, just hours before her body was discovered. He claimed to have given Candy a ride the day she disappeared, but maintained his innocence in her murder. He was tried and found guilty, based on witness testimony and blood evidence. According to authorities, Earhart had been on their radar during the investigation into Ginger's murder. DNA evidence tied him to the crime after Parabon uploaded the DNA profile generated from the evidence found under Ginger's fingernails into genealogy databases. They then identified 2 women they believed to be the killer's second cousins based on the amount of DNA they shared with the submitted profile. They then researched the descendants of the 2 women's shared great-grandparents, one of whom was Earhart. A sample of Earhart's DNA had not been collected prior to his execution. His son agreed to provide authorities with a sample of his DNA, which showed that he was the son of the contributor of the DNA found at the crime scene. This led to the announcement identifying Earhart as Ginger's murderer. Earhart's remains were exhumed in June of 2018 to obtain a direct DNA sample. When the testing on that sample was completed in August of 2019, it confirmed that the DNA found under Ginger's fingernails belonged to Earhart. Nearly 38 years after Ginger was killed, authorities believed they finally conclusively identified her killer. "We are all elated to finally close this case," Sheriff Kirk said. "The one regret I have is that we weren't able to put handcuffs on the suspect and prosecute him for the vicious killing of Virginia Freeman." Ginger's husband, Charles, did not live long enough to see his wife's killer identified. Ginger's children were living in Austin at the time Earhart was named as their mother's killer. They released a statement thanking law enforcement for their dedication to their mother's case. On the quiet autumn night of October 31, 1991, in Tyler, Texas, as the fall season settled in, the clock struck 2 a.m. The peaceful neighborhood on 29th Street was deep in sleep, except for a small framed house at the corner, blissfully unaware that it was about to become a scene of horror. 8-year-old Chad Choice lay in bed, lost in dreams, when an intruder silently entered the home, snatching him away into the darkness. Initially classified as a runaway due to the lack of evidence, The case turned into a nightmare for investigators once the critical 48-hour window passed without any sign of Chad. Who could have had the means to infiltrate Chad's home so quietly, whisking him away without a trace? The pivotal question remains: would Chad ever reunite with his family and return home? Tyler, named after the 10th President of the United States, John Tyler, is the largest city in northeastern Texas. Often called the Rose Capital or Rose City, Tyler earned this title due to its rich history of rose production and cultivation. Each October, the city attracts thousands of tourists. However, the October of 1991 took a dark turn as Chad Choice mysteriously vanished, casting a shadow over the usually vibrant atmosphere. Ernest Chadwick Choice, known affectionately as Chad Choice, came into the world on April 26, 1983 in Texas. He was one of the cherished 4 children in the Choice household, a beautiful soul deeply adored by his family, particularly his mother, Karen Elaine Choice. Chad was an outgoing youngster, surrounded by a large circle of friends with whom he frequently played. Moreover, his strong bond and affectionate relationship with his siblings were apparent, as they often enjoyed quality time together. Chad's energetic and lively nature was further evident in his regular visits to the playground. Chad had an older sister named Angela Choice, who fondly recalls that her little brother had a passion for riding bikes, scaling trees, and indulging in sports. Details about the remaining siblings were not made public. As a student at Mommy G. Griffin Elementary School, Chad's life was in its budding stage. At just 8 years old, he had his entire future ahead of him. However, fate often takes unforeseen turns, and tragically, Chad's destiny had already been sealed. The daily routine of the Choice family was shattered on the morning of October 31, 1991. On the fateful morning, Chad's mother, Karen, rose early and went to the church without waking her children, allowing them to continue sleeping. However, just a few minutes into her church service, Karen received a phone call. Karen rushed back home and began scouring the neighborhood for Chad. She sought assistance from her neighbors as well. Despite their collective efforts and their thorough search, Chad seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was as though he had disappeared into thin air. Now it was the police's turn to investigate the matter. Karen dialed 711, reaching the Tyler police station, where Sergeant Bill Gokane responded and arrived at their house shortly after the call. During his initial inspection, he looked for signs of a break-in, but there were no indication of forced entry. Moreover, there were no signs of struggle inside the house. The first thing he notices: no prime marks on the door. Based on the initial investigation, Gokane began to consider the possibility that Chad might have run away from home. However, Karen firmly believed that her son had been kidnapped, and as the sun set and the day turned into a chilly night, her tension escalated into fear. Adding to her fear, the crucial 48-hour window had passed without any signs of him. Later during the interview, Chad's older sister, Angela Choice, provided a crucial piece of information to the detective. Her house keys had disappeared the day before, and she distinctly recalled leaving them by the back door of the residence. This revelation raised additional questions, suggesting the possibility of a planned kidnapping or something even more disturbing. 2 days after Chad's disappearance, a ransom note was discovered at the business of Chad's uncle, Greg Sterling, prompting the investigation to swiftly shift focus to a kidnapping scenario. As the family attempted to deliver the money at the Greyhound bus station, as instructed, the kidnapper failed to appear. Several days later, Chad's mother received an anonymous phone call, revealing that Chad's disappearance was leaked to a family member's drug debt with a man named Paco. Investigators discovered that Greg Sterling owed money to 3 Colombian drug dealers in the area, Paco Jr. and Carlos, shedding light on a possible motive of Chad's abduction. However, the case still remained elusive. On the 1-year anniversary of Chad's disappearance, his mother Karen Choice discovered a note fluttering on her car windshield. The note asserted that Chad was still alive and demanded $6,000 for his safe return. This development reignited the investigation, filling the Choice family with hope and prayers of seeing Chad again. However, the case suffered a setback when the kidnapper failed to make contact once more, causing the investigation to stall again. Time was not on their side. Slowly years were passing by, and Chad Choice's disappearance gradually evolved into a cold case. 4 years later, in October 1995, a grocery sack appeared on the Chase family's doorstep. Initially, it seemed like a regular grocery sack. However, upon opening, it revealed something that would haunt Karen Choice for the rest of her life. Inside the package was a human skull. The skull was subsequently sent to the FBI for analysis. DNA samples from Choice's family were collected to compare with the skull's DNA to confirm its identity as Chad's. Despite these efforts, the results remained inconclusive. Later, the skull was sent to a university in Texas for further examination, involving the expertise of forensic anthropology. The results came back, and unfortunately Karen's worst fears were confirmed, when forensic analysis revealed that the skull indeed belonged to Chad. Investigators grappled with the ruthless nature of a person who not only commits a crime, but continues to torment the victim's family for years. Despite the struggle to comprehend this, Karen, all along, had an unshakable feeling in her heart that she would never see Chad alive again. All she could do now was pray for justice. While Chad Choice's case grew increasingly difficult to solve, another narrative unfolded in Smith County Jail in early 1996. A man named Patrick Horn was slated to be sentenced in federal court for credit union robberies and carjacking charges. He was also charged with the murder of J.C. Levasseur, a fruit stand owner. It became evident that he was destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars or even face a potential death sentence. However, this man we are discussing was soon to become the center of Chad's murder case. It occurred when he mentioned the name Chad Choice to the police during his time behind the bars. While this might have been a part of a deal to reduce his prison sentence, to the investigators it marked the first significant breakthrough they had made in the case so far. Horn was a resident in the Choice family's neighborhood and was friends with them. During his interview regarding Chad's case, Horn informed investigators that he knew the identity of Chad's killer. As per Horn's account, Chad was murdered by 2 local drug dealers, both Colombian nationals, who were known by the street names Paco and Carlos. But the case was just about to get more twisted. After Horn made the statement, he received a package in his jail cell containing a small boy's leg bone, later confirmed through analysis to be Chad's. Horn asserted to the police that Paco and Carlos had sent the package. However, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Horn was hiding something significant about the entire story. Despite repeated questioning by the detectives, Horn consistently maintained that he had no additional information apart from Paco and Carlos being the culprits. However, on May 31, 1996, Horn finally disclosed something more. Horn then revealed the precise location where Chad was buried. Shortly afterward, he was escorted by the police to 401 Sunnyside in Tyler, which was Horn's own backyard. At 4 p.m. that same day, the detectives began digging and discovered Chad's skeletal remains, along with 38 caliber shell casings. This moment marked a sudden turn in the investigation. With the evidence before them, all suspicions now pointed directly at Patrick Horn. Without delay, in June 1996, the investigators hurried to Athens, a city in Texas. In a jail cell there, a man sat who was anticipated to be a crucial piece of the puzzle, important in solving the case once and for all. This man was none other than Patrick Horn's brother, Keaton Horn, who was facing charges of probation violation. The detectives' suspicions were completely on point this time. With Keaton's statement, this case solidified into concrete evidence that Horn was indeed responsible for this notorious crime. Horn's scheme to mislead investigators had ultimately unraveled. The solution to a seemingly unsolvable case was finally in hand. However, one question still lingered. Why did Horn kill Chad? On September 24, 1999, 8 years after Chad Choice's murder, the jury found Horn guilty in the Smith County Courthouse and sentenced him to death. However, even at the end of his chapter, Horn witnessed tormenting the Choice household. Horn adamantly refused to sign the waiver allowing Chad's remains to be released to his family for a proper burial. Legally, he was required to agree to the release since the remains were evidence in his case. However, he insisted on retaining control over the fate of the 8-year-old Chad's remains. Horn did initially sign a waiver, indicating his agreement to the release of Chad Choice's remains. However, the document was somehow lost between his attorney's office and the judge's office. At first deemed a mere formality, District Judge Diane Divazadu announced in a December 1999 hearing that she would order the release of 30 exhibits, including Chad's skull and other bones, to his family for burial, contingent upon Horn signing another waiver. Horn's appellate lawyer, Tony Wilkinson of Greenville, sent the document to Horn via Federal Express, anticipating its return with his signature within a day. However, a month passed without any response from Horn. He did not reply to several letters from his attorney and ignored messages sent to him through officials at the Atlanta Federal Prison. Assistant District Attorney Ed Marty stated that if the remains were granted without the waiver, they might have to be exhumed sometime in the future. It remains uncertain when Horn eventually signed the waiver, and if he did, when he signed it. Furthermore, Horn was 17 years old when he committed the murder of Chad. According to a ruling by the United States Supreme Court, anyone under the age of 18 cannot be executed. As a result, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. While this might not have been the exact form of justice Karen Joyce desired, she can finally find solace in knowing that Patrick Horn will never walk free. As the final chapter in the Chad Joyce case concludes, there remains a haunting mystery that continues to trouble both investigators and Chad's grieving family. Why did Patrick Horn go to such lengths? Kidnapping Chad Joyce, refusing the ransom, and ultimately taking his life? What could have motivated such a horrifying act? And do you believe the mother who lost her beloved child will ever find peace again? Helene Anderson, known as Nikki, was born on October 15, 1958, in South Bend, Indiana. By early 1986, the 27-year-old Nikki was living in a duplex at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Bremerton, Washington, and working at a nearby Arby's restaurant. She shared her home on Magnolia Drive with her two children, 4-year-old Adrienne and 7-month-old Marcus. Adrienne's father, Kenny Hale, described her as a gift from God, with a charming smile and a strong personality, even at such a young age. He noted that she was an advanced child, able to spell her name by the time she was just 2 years old. Though Kenny and Nikki's relationship had not lasted, they remained involved in each other's lives for the sake of their daughter. They co-parented Adrienne well and often spent time together as a family. In January 1986, Nikki was engaged to the father of her son, who was serving in the United States Navy and stationed in San Diego. She was busy packing up her home in preparation for moving to California to be near him. During this transition, Adrienne would stay in Washington with Kenny for a while until Nikki was settled in California, at which point she would join her mother. On the evening of January 29th, Kenny visited Nikki's home to spend time with Adrienne after finishing work. When it was time for him to leave, Adrienne asked if she could spend the night at his house. He considered bringing her along but ultimately said no, wanting to keep her on her usual schedule and avoiding an early wake-up. He assured Adrienne that he would see her the next day before he left for the evening. Adrienne waved to him from the house's front window as he left. Kenny returned to the home on Magnolia Drive the following evening, as planned. He was surprised when there was no answer when he knocked on the front door. Disappointed, he turned around to leave. However, as he did, he could hear Nikki's son, Marcus, whimpering inside the house. Concerned, he tried the front door and found that it was unlocked. He had trouble fully opening the door as something inside was blocking the door's path. Kenny tripped over something as he entered the home. When he reached down, he grabbed something stiff. His heart dropped when he realized he was holding his daughter's leg. It was dark inside the home, but Kenny could see Adrienne lying on the floor near the front door and Nikki lying further inside the home. Kenny grabbed baby Marcus, who was in a playpen just feet away from his mother, and ran next door to the neighbor's home to get help. While the neighbor called police, Kenny ran back to Adrienne. Not knowing how long she had been there, he frantically began performing CPR on his daughter. Tragically, his efforts could not save his little girl. It would later be determined that Adrienne and Nikki had been dead, and baby Marcus had been alone in the home with their bodies for approximately 20 hours. Nikki and Adrienne had both been strangled to death. In addition, Nikki had suffered blows to the back of her head. Defensive wounds showed that she had fought fiercely against her killer. She had been sexually assaulted, which police believed was the motive for her murder. Robbery did not appear to be a motive, as valuables that were out in plain sight had been left behind. Adrienne had been found in her pajamas with the comforter from her bed near her. Investigators theorized that she had been woken up by the noise created by the struggle of the killer attacking her mother, and she had come into the living room to see what was going on. Based on where her body was found, she appears to have tried to escape the house, with the killer catching her just before she reached the front door. Police believed she was killed because she saw her mother's killer and was old enough to potentially identify him. Police theorized that 7-month-old Marcus was not killed because he was not old enough to describe or identify the killer. The killer placed Marcus in a playpen along with a cushion he removed from a nearby couch. Nikki's neighbor on the other side of the duplex says she did not hear anything the night of the murders. Normally, she could hear everyday noises through their shared wall, but she heard no screams or a struggle that night. She later said that she had an ear infection at the time, which may have impacted her hearing. She did hear Marcus crying throughout the day following the murders, but assumed it was just his normal cries for food or a fresh diaper. 2 other witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing one scream the night of the murders, but nothing else. Numerous people had come to the home looking for Nikki on January 30th, including an acquaintance, a coworker, and a furniture salesman. Some of them came to the home multiple times, but no one tried to open the front door until that evening when Kenny Hale heard Marcus crying. Nikki's fiancé was confirmed to have been on duty at his naval base in San Diego at the time of the murders, eliminating him as a potential suspect. While Kenny Hale did have an alibi for the time of the murders as well, he remained under suspicion in the early days of the investigation. Police were skeptical of the peaceful co-parenting relationship he had with Nikki, viewed her upcoming move as a potential motive, and knew Kenny had regular access to the home. Kenny wanted to do whatever he could to help with the investigation and was shocked when he realized he was being considered as a suspect. His sister told him he should hire a lawyer soon after the murders. Kenny did not see how this would be necessary, but took her advice, which quickly proved to be a wise decision when he was aggressively questioned by police. Kenny agreed to undergo a voluntary polygraph examination, but his lawyer terminated the exam halfway through it, pointing out that Kenny was still too emotionally distraught for the results of the examination to be accurate. According to Kenny, after he walked out of the police station that day, it would be a decade before he heard anything more from police. The case soon went cold, with police following up on all the leads they could initially identify within the first 6 to 8 months of the investigation. Authorities identified a handful of potential suspects, including the boyfriend of Nikki's aunt, a neighbor who had babysat Adrienne, and a man whose car was seen in the neighborhood that night, but none of them could be tied to the murders. The case was reopened by police in 1993, 2003, 2009, and 2019, but the renewed efforts have so far not led to any arrests. In the later efforts, Kenny Hale was contacted by investigators and made aware of their ongoing efforts. There is one major clue in the case, but authorities have so far been unable to use it to identify the killer. DNA evidence, believed to be from the killer, was found at the scene. The exact source of the DNA has not been publicly disclosed. Bremerton Police Detective Marty Garland, who has most recently been overseeing the investigation, has stated that it is unclear if the sexual assault against Nikki was, in his words, completed. A local newspaper reported in 2010 that a drop of blood that did not belong to either Nikki or Adrienne had been found on Adrienne's nightgown, but this has not been confirmed as the source of the DNA. Unfortunately, wherever the DNA came from, it has proven to be of limited use to the investigation. Despite advanced testing, the DNA profile that was developed is not complete. It is not a complete enough profile for investigators to be allowed by law to run it through criminal databases or use genetic genealogy to identify the killer. The only option investigators have is to directly compare it to samples taken from suspects they are able to identify. All of the men known to have been close to Nikki, including Kenny Hale, have been tested and eliminated as a contributor of the DNA. There were no signs of forced entry into Nikki's house. Investigators do not believe she would have opened her door to someone she did not know in the middle of the night, since no one known to be associated with her has been a match to the DNA. Investigators theorized that the killer was known by Nikki well enough for her to open her door for them, but not so well that he could be identified by the other people in her life. When he was contacted by different detectives over the years, Kenny Hale did not feel particularly optimistic about their efforts. When Detective Garland took over the case and contacted him, however, Kenny felt differently. Detective Garland has looked into numerous potential avenues of investigation in the case in recent years. He has conducted further DNA testing, investigated known serial killers, and even explored the possibility of having Nikki's son, Marcus, who was just 7 months old at the time of the murders, undergo hypnosis. He believes he is close to solving the case if he can just track down the right individual to compare the DNA from the crime scene to. Nikki's son, Marcus, is now in his 30s and lives in Mississippi, where his father, Nikki's fiancé at the time of her murder, also lives. Kenny Hale still struggles with the loss of his daughter and with remembering the brutal end to her young life. He has albums full of pictures he took of her, but sometimes he cannot look through them in their entirety because he becomes too emotional. While his relationship with Nikki did not work out, he still describes her as a beautiful person who did not deserve her violent death and hopes to get justice for her as well. As painful as revisiting the murders is for him, he will not give up on his daughter and her mother or on finally getting answers in their case. It gets kinda hard to go back and relive the story, he told the Daily Beast in 2022. But as long as I got air in my lungs and am able to tell their story, I'll keep telling their story until I can't tell it no more. At 4:45 p.m. on January 24, 1991, 13-year-old Puala Ilarra returned home from school in East Harlem, New York. Her mother buzzed her into the building as she entered the elevator, heading toward her family's unit on the 30th floor. However, she mysteriously vanished during that brief ride. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man walking his dog stumbled upon Puala's lifeless body half a mile from her home. As the sun set on that tragic day, the neighborhood was left with haunting questions. What happened to Puala, and who could be responsible for her disappearance and death? Puala and her family were part of the East Harlem community, also known as El Barrio. Situated in the heart of Manhattan, this culturally rich area is celebrated for its vibrant mix of traditions, art, and community spirit. East Harlem boasts a diverse population, heavily influenced by Hispanic and Latino heritage, as seen in its lively festivals, eateries, and colorful murals that decorate its streets. The neighborhood is home to the renowned Museum of the City of New York, which showcases the city's history. Statistics indicate that the likelihood of being a victim of crime in East Harlem is approximately 1 in 22. And it is here that our story begins. Puala Ilarra was born in Colombia in the late 1970s to her parents, Cesar and Olga Ilarra, and had 2 older siblings, Julio and Alexandra. In June 1990, Puala, along with her mother and 2 siblings, moved to East Harlem, New York City, in hopes of a better life. They lived on the 30th floor of an apartment building at 420 East 111th Street with Puala's uncle, Guillermo Ospina. Her father, Cesar, stayed in Colombia, working as a taxi driver and saving money to eventually join them in New York. Upon arriving in the city, Puala began attending Junior High School 99. According to her sister, Alexandra, Puala excelled academically, dedicating her free time to studying English and mathematics. She had only a handful of friends, mostly classmates, and aspired to become a lawyer to help those in need. Her uncle Guillermo described her as highly intelligent and mature for her age, thinking beyond her years. He also noted that Puala was very happy in New York because of her love for the English language. She was a young girl with many plans for the future, her uncle Guillermo said. Everything appeared to be going smoothly for Puala and her family until a heartbreaking event suddenly changed their lives. On the cold afternoon of January 24, 1991, Puala, who was just 13 years old at the time, left her school and made her way back to the familiar surroundings of her apartment building. At approximately 4:45 p.m., she arrived at the entrance of the building and used the intercom to call her apartment. Her mother, Olga answered and let her in by pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. This ordinary interaction would be the final one Olga would share with her beloved daughter. With the door now open, Puala entered the lobby and stepped into an elevator. But tragically, she never made it to their 30th floor apartment. 10 minutes later, when Puala hadn't arrived home, her brother and uncle grew worried. They felt that something was amiss and decided to go look for her. As they hurried down to the lobby, they found it completely empty. They began searching the neighborhood desperately for Puala, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man out for a walk with his dog made a chilling discovery. He spotted a lifeless figure lying on a walkway near the East River. The area was littered with drug-related items like vials, syringes, and used lighters. Tragically, what he found was Puala's slender body, and she had passed away. The site where she was found was located about a half a mile to the south of the apartment building where she lived. When detectives arrived at the scene, they were faced with a deeply saddening sight. There were no clues to indicate who might have committed this crime. The only things they discovered on Puala's body were a new Kids on the Block watch on her wrist and a piece of chalk in her pocket. Puala's murder profoundly affected not only her family but also the entire neighborhood. Her mother Olga was inconsolable, struggling to come to terms with the loss of her daughter. At Puala's school, both students and teachers were in shock. In the aftermath of this tragedy, teachers held meetings with students to provide support for those who were close to Puala, helping them cope with their grief. They also advised all students not to walk alone in the area for safety reasons. In response to the incident, reporters were not allowed to access the school, and the principal and district officials declined to speak with them. Detectives were left with numerous unanswered questions. They went from door to door in the 32-floor building, hoping to find witnesses who might have seen Puala in the area where her body was eventually discovered. Unfortunately, they couldn't locate anyone who had seen her there. Moreover, the detectives had no information about the appearance of the person responsible for this tragedy. It remained uncertain whether Puala was killed in the isolated spot filled with crack vials where her body was found or somewhere else. Due to their investigation, the detectives managed to piece together some important details. They discovered that Puala regularly stayed at school after hours for a journalism workshop on Thursdays. On the day of her tragic murder, she had been working on an article about her father, intending to send it to him as a Valentine's Day gift. The detectives also found out that on that fateful day, Puala left the school after the workshop at around 4 p.m. and walked north along First Avenue with a friend. They parted ways at 106th Street with Puala continuing to her family's apartment building. During their inquiries, the detective learned that another teenager named Aaron Wofford had entered the same elevator as Puala. However, when they spoke with him, he claimed to have gotten off at the 19th floor while Puala continued upward. As a result, the detective shifted their focus away from him as a suspect. The autopsy revealed the full extent of the terrible ordeal Puala had endured. She had been violated, strangled, and stabbed 3 times near her heart. The medical examiner also noticed unusual elongated marks on her thighs. It was clear that Puala had bravely resisted an assault, and her attacker had forcefully separated her legs, causing bruises on their thighs that matched the shape of their fingers. The examiner also collected male hair from her body. This was stored as evidence. On February 2, 1991, Puala's body was laid to rest at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens. For months later after her tragic murder, Puala's family decided to relocate to Flushing, New York, and they received support from Victim Services, a private nonprofit organization that assists victims of violent crimes and their families. In Flushing, Olga sought solace through counseling at the Families of Homicide Victims program, also run by Victim Services. As the family continued to cope and heal, they held on to the hope of achieving justice for Puala. However, as this time passed, Puala's case gradually grew colder and the quest for answers became increasingly challenging. The murder of a 13-year-old girl should have been a major news story in any city at any time. However, in the violence-ridden New York of 1991, this dreadful crime in East Harlem was largely unnoticed. Between 1990 and 1992, the city reported over 2,000 murders each year. with an average of 6 bodies discovered daily across the 5 boroughs of New York City. Unfortunately, most of these occurred in impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods, such as East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Regrettably, very few of these cases received significant attention from the media. Instead, the media often focused on more upscale crimes involving white wealthy victims in picturesque locations. Without the pressure from the media or politicians, Puala's case became a low-priority homicide. Consequently, her murder remained unsolved and largely forgotten throughout much of the 1990s. By the mid-1990s, crime rates in New York City were on the decline. However, in the housing projects of East Harlem, a disturbing trend persisted. A series of seemingly unrelated incidents began to occur, all involving the assault and murder of young, attractive teenagers with large skin, regardless of whether they were black or Hispanic. In 1994, a 15-year-old girl became a victim when she was confronted by an attacker brandishing a knife. This case revealed a consistent pattern used by the assailant, which he would repeat multiple times over the next 4 years. He would approach the teenager from behind and guide her to an isolated location. There he would blindfold her using a piece of her own clothing, coerce her to undress, and then subject her to assault. Remarkably, the 15-year-old survivor was able to provide a description of her attacker. He was a well-groomed young man with a muscular build, and he displayed an excessive sense of self-importance. Shockingly, he even told the victim that she should consider herself fortunate to be assaulted by someone as good-looking as himself. A few years later, on September 10, 1997, firefighters responded to a rooftop fire at the George Washington houses on East 104th Street. In the aftermath, they discovered the lifeless body of a woman who had suffered severe abuse, had been struck with a blunt object, and was burnt so badly that she was unrecognizable. This victim was later identified as 19-year-old Jaiz Castro, who had moved to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family. Jo Hiaz, a young mother with a daughter, had been pursuing her studies in computer science at a community college in the Bronx. 7 months later, in April 1998, a 13-year-old girl was the next victim in the same neighborhood. Thankfully, this young victim managed to escape with her life. 2 months after that, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington met a tragic end. She was found in a 15th-floor stairwell of an East 112th Street housing project, having been robbed, assaulted, and strangled. Her lifeless body with its naked torso covered by a shirt had been positioned in a seated stance against the wall. Similar to the earlier victims, Rashida, a fashion student who worked at a clothing boutique, was petite, weighing only 100 pounds. Tragically, she was murdered just 3 days after celebrating her 18th birthday. In that same year, during the fall, 2 more young teenagers fell victim to assaults in the same area. A 15-year-old was attacked on September 25, 1998, followed by a 14-year-old on November 16th. Thankfully, these 2 adolescents survived, likely because they didn't get a good look at the attacker before being blindfolded. Even as these similar cases continued to accumulate, the police did not publicly acknowledge the possibility of a serial murderer targeting teenage girls in East Harlem. However, due to the concerns raised by the parents of the victims, the police eventually decided to take prompt action. In the 1990s, there was a relatively small database of DNA samples on record because of widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet begun. However, a significant breakthrough had occurred in the autumn of 1998 concerning the East Harlem cases. New York police experts in forensics compared bodily fluid evidence from the Rashida Washington murder with evidence from 2 other similar cases in the neighborhood. These tests conclusively linked the same perpetrator to all 3 crimes. Finally, detectives had solid evidence confirming the existence of a serial criminal preying on teenagers in Harlem. In response, police leadership assembled a specialized task force comprising detectives with the sole mission of apprehending the suspect. The police took action by distributing a wanted poster that included a sketch of the serial attacker. This sketch was based on descriptions provided by the victims. Shortly after posting the flyer in East Harlem, a tipster who called and suggested that the detectives should closely investigate a 25-year-old man known as Ace, who resided on the 19th floor of the same building where Puala had lived. The police quickly identified Ace's real name as Aaron Key, and this name triggered a memory. The name Aaron had initially surfaced during Puala's murder investigation. Detectives recalled the teenager named Aaron Wofford, who had been seen entering the elevator at the same time as Puala and had claimed to have exited on the 19th floor. The distinctive first name, Iran, had also reappeared in the investigation of Jogias Castro's murder in 1997. Phone records showed that in the days leading up to her death, Jo Hayes had made numerous calls to a man named Aaron Key. When questioned by the police, Aaron explained that Jo Hayes had been a friend of his girlfriend, Jacqueline. He accounted for his numerous phone calls by stating that the two women had been planning a shopping trip on the day of Jaya's murder. The police also interviewed Jacqueline, who confirmed Aaron's explanation. It was only later that the police realized that Aaron Wofford and Aaron Key were actually the same person. Wofford was his father's last name and Key was his mother's. This revelation connected Iran Key to 2 out of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. He was the last person known to have seen Puala alive, and there was a significant history of phone communication between him and Jo Hayes in the days leading up to her death. These connections could not only have been coincidence. Detectives decided to dig deeper into Iran's background. They found that he was an intelligent and reasonably well-spoken individual. He was born on September 18, 1973, and he had spent most of his childhood in East Harlem. During the time of Puala's disappearance in 1991, he was living with relatives in the same building as her. Iran was known as a charming person with a knack for computers. He claimed to be involved in rap music production, although there was little evidence to support this claim. Physically, he stood just 5 feet 8 inches and he was fairly handsome. His criminal record showed only 1 arrest for robbery in 1990, and he had spent little or no time behind bars. However, neighbors had a different perspective on Iran. They described him as having a troubling side. He had a habit of peering through the peepholes of women in his building, and he often wandered around with a portable video camera attempting to capture inappropriate footage. At this stage, the police didn't have much substantial evidence against Iran, but they understood the importance of a thorough investigation. They focused on the assailant involved in the September 1998 incident, who had left behind a black boo-boo cap and a gray sweatshirt. The detectives decided to look closer into these clothing items for leads. Their efforts paid off when they found a laundry tag on one of the garments. This tag eventually led the police to a dry cleaner located near Iran's building. What made this discovery even more significant was that the client list at this dry cleaner included Iran's mother, Cynthia. Every piece of information seemed to point to Iran as a prime suspect, and law enforcement was increasingly convinced that testing his DNA would confirm his involvement in the crimes. However, there was a significant hurdle. Iran had no DNA on record because mandatory DNA testing for accused felons in New York wouldn't begin until the year 2000. In the 1990s, obtaining a DNA sample was not as straightforward as bringing a suspect and asking for a swab. DNA tests were still seen as invasive procedures, and acquiring a sample required judicial authorization based on reasonable suspicion. Even though there was substantial circumstantial evidence pointing towards Iran's involvement, detectives were aware that the details like the elevator ride, phone calls, and the laundry tag alone wouldn't be enough to persuade a judge to order Iran to provide a DNA sample. Consequently, the police had to resort to an alternative plan. Their initial approach involved tailing Iran Key, hoping he would unknowingly leave behind a sample of his saliva, like through spitting or disposing of chewing gum. However, this tactic quickly proved to be unsuccessful. On February 8, 1999, detectives finally caught a break when Iran was arrested for his involvement in the theft of a computer hard drive. Since there were no laws mandating DNA testing for arrested individuals in New York at that time, the police had to resort to a bit of trickery in an attempt to obtain a DNA sample. They devised a plan where a female detective disguised herself as a doctor. Wearing a white hospital garment, she approached Iran and asked him to provide a saliva sample for what she described as a routine tuberculosis test. She handed him paperwork in hopes he would sign a release form. However, Iran, being cautious, took the time to read the document. When he noticed a line mentioning DNA analysis, he refused to cooperate. He claimed that he was a practicing Jehovah's Witness and that his faith prohibited him from participating in any form of medical treatment. Iran had figured out what the police were after, and he was determined not to give it to them. After finishing his meal that evening, he tore his paper cup into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. To further confuse investigators, he swapped his cup with that of his cellmate. However, the police were one step ahead. Shortly after Aaron's arrest, he had been in a shared holding cell with several other men. During their time there, attendants had provided them with cups of water. Detectives managed to locate these cups in a wastepaper basket and set them for DNA testing. Within just a couple of days, the results came back, confirming that a sample collected from the rim of one of the cups found in the police holding cell matched the DNA of the East Harlem criminal. By the time the DNA test results were ready on February 12, 1999, Iran had already been released without bail as he was only facing a misdemeanor charge related to computer theft. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department offered an $11,000 reward for any information that could lead to his arrest. Authorities soon discovered that Iran had traveled to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with his 16-year-old girlfriend named Angelique Stalling. Her parents believed that they were going on a Valentine's Day date. However, instead of sticking to their plans, Iran and Angelique boarded a bus headed for Florida from Newark, New Jersey. Detectives grew concerned that Angelique might be in danger, potentially facing the same fate as the previous victims. After Iran arrived in South Florida, he made 2 phone calls to another girlfriend back in New York. By this time, news of his status as a suspected serial killer on the run had made headlines. The second girlfriend, aware of the situation, promptly contacted the police and provided a tip that Iran was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel located just 2 blocks from the beach on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami. Responding to this tip, 2 New York detectives rushed to the hotel and began surveilling it. When they spotted Iran and Angelique walking around inside, they called the Miami-Dade SWAT team for assistance. The SWAT team stormed the building and discovered Iran and Angelique hiding under the bed on the hotel's 6th floor. And on February 19, 1999, Iran was apprehended and placed in custody. When detectives attempted to interrogate Iran about the East Harlem crimes, he remained silent and did not provide any information. However, the police had a plan. They later observed and listened from behind a 2-way mirror as they allowed Angelique into the interview room. Iran and Angelique believed they were having a private moment to say their goodbyes. During this conversation, Angelique pressed Iran to explain why he had committed the crimes. Iran's response was cryptic. He mentioned that he had bugged out and claimed to have had a sickness. After a lengthy 4-month legal battle, Iran was eventually extradited to New York to face trial on 22 felony charges related to 4 assaults in the murders of Puala Ilarra, Jogias Castro, and Rashida Washington. DNA evidence connected Iran to 6 out of the 7 cases. During the trial, in the fall of 2000, prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky presented a powerful case. With a barrage of testimonies and DNA evidence against Iran, they called upon 130 prosecution witnesses, including 2 of Iran's victims. Iran himself insisted on being the first defense witness to take the stand. Over the course of 2 days of testimony, Iran displayed a range of emotions. From giggling like a schoolgirl to crying like a baby, he also expressed his anger at being prosecuted. His monologue, which was largely uninterrupted by the judge, prosecutors, or his own attorneys, covered a wide range of topics including pop culture, drugs, rap music, jail food, and his reflections on the criminal justice system. With many of his victims' family members present in the courtroom, Iran moved a bizarre narrative to explain why he found himself facing charges of brutal serial violence against young women. He asserted that the police had conspired to frame him as a part of a cover-up orchestrated by a corrupt medical examiner who was involved in harvesting and selling human organs. He even claimed that his DNA had been manipulated in what he referred to as genetic shuffling. However, the jury did not buy into his elaborate story. On December 16, 2000, when the guilty verdict was delivered, the courtroom burst into cheers. As Iran was later led past the crowd of grieving relatives, he directed a profane curse at them. During the sentencing a month later in January 2001, family members of Iran's victims had the opportunity to speak directly to him. Olga Paula's mother addressed him, expressing her wish that he would understand the torment of sleepless nights, loss of appetite, the inability to walk or breathe, and the absence of peace. All the while thinking about her daughter's suffering at the time of her death. Olga spoke of her enduring pain, having brought her daughter to the country in pursuit of the American dream. When it was Iran's turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, he began to cry and said that he was sorry. In response to this, a male cousin of Johias Castro erupted in anger and attempted to leap over the barrier in an effort to attack Iran. Following this, Justice Joan Sodonic delivered the sentence. She imposed 3 life sentences on Iran, each without the possibility of parole for the 3 murders. Additionally, he received a 400-year sentence for 4 counts of abuse. Iran was incarcerated in the Clinton Correctional Facility located in Dannemora, New York. By the time Iran was sentenced, lawmakers in New York and many other states had enacted laws requiring DNA testing for individuals arrested in connection with violent crimes. Since then, this testing has been expanded to encompass most felony arrests, spanning both violent and nonviolent offenses. Moreover, certain jurisdictions have initiated DNA testing for individuals arrested for misdemeanors. For Olga, the agony of losing Puala remains as raw as ever. She understands all too clearly that the anguish stemming from the sudden and senseless loss of a loved one doesn't fade with time, especially when so many unresolved questions linger. As we conclude this heart-wrenching journey through Puala's tragic story, her memory and that of the other victims lingers in our thoughts. Reflecting on Iran's actions and consequences he faced, we are left with thought-provoking questions. What drives an individual like Iran to commit crimes like this? And how can society identify and address the factors that lead to such behavior? George Nelson Shaw Sr. was born in West Virginia in October 1936. He met his wife, Norma, in 1959, and they had their first date at the Florida State Fair on Valentine's Day. They married just months later, in June. Their marriage lasted nearly 59 years and produced 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 23 great-grandchildren. George was a deacon at his church and enjoyed hunting, reading, and gardening. He served in the United States Air Force for 28 years, retiring with the rank of Senior Master Sergeant. After leaving the Air Force, he worked for 8 years at the Lewis A. Johnson Medical Center, a Veterans Administration hospital in Clarksburg, West Virginia. In 2018, he returned to that hospital as a patient, suffering from dementia but not in critical condition. Just 2 weeks prior, he had been active with his bowling league. He was admitted on March 22, 2018, due to low blood pressure and dehydration. Because his condition wasn't life-threatening, he was placed on the 3A Medical Surgical Wing instead of the intensive care unit. After receiving fluids, George's health improved, and he was soon able to walk the hospital halls. However, his condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. For days into his stay, he suffered an inexplicable hypoglycemic event, causing his blood sugar to crash without an identifiable cause. The medical staff managed to stabilize his blood sugar, but it dropped again soon after. From that point, George's health continued to decline. He spent his final days seemingly trapped in his own body, unable to care for himself or communicate with his family. He passed away on April 10, 2018, at the age of 81. George's family found his sudden passing suspicious and requested an autopsy. Although the medical examiner noted evidence of heart disease, he attributed the cause of death to congestive heart failure. The Shaw family's concerns were heightened several months later when officials sought permission to exhume George's body for further examination at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. They granted permission, and the second autopsy revealed troubling findings. Tests on the tissues surrounding the injection sites indicated that George had been injected with insulin at 4 locations. George was not diabetic, and he had never been prescribed insulin. The Armed Forces medical examiner ruled that the manner of George's death was a homicide, and its cause was exogenous insulin administration. This means that George was intentionally injected with medically unnecessary insulin with the goal of driving his blood sugar, leading to the hypoglycemic event that led to his death. 84-year-old Archie Dale Edgell was admitted to the same floor of the same hospital on the same day as George Shaw. Archie was an Army veteran who served during the Korean War. He was a talented musician who could play almost any instrument he picked up. He served as a street water commissioner for the city of Salem, West Virginia for several years. He was married to his wife, Frances, for over 60 years, and they had 5 children and eventually numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Archie had been sent to Johnson Medical Center by his primary care physician for issues stemming from his dementia. He was being cared for at the federally run Veterans Administration Hospital while it was being determined if his dementia had advanced to the point where he should be admitted to the West Virginia Veterans Nursing Facility, a state-run facility located next door. Archie had not been in serious condition when he arrived at the hospital, and he had walked into the building on his own. Archie did have type 2 diabetes, so his blood sugar was tested upon his admission. His reading was slightly elevated at 165. The hospital did not administer insulin to try to lower it. Archie's blood sugar plummeted after he had been in the hospital with readings in the 20s-30s for the next several days with no explanation. The medications Archie had been prescribed to control his blood sugar were held during his hospital stay, and he was instead given dextrose and medications to raise his blood sugar level back to normal levels. Archie passed away on March 26, 2018, 4 days after he was admitted to the Johnson Medical Center. His medical team had no explanation for his hypoglycemia or his death, but he was buried without further investigation. Archie's family had felt that something was suspicious about his death. When investigators came to meet with them in November of 2018 to discuss exhuming his body for further testing, Archie's son Steve's first words to them when they arrived were, "They killed my father, didn't they?" Archie's wife, Frances, lived to learn that her husband, Steph, was considered suspicious, but passed away in April of 2019, 2 months before the report detailing the findings of the examination of his remains was released. Her son, Steve, believes she died of a broken heart. The examination of Archie's body revealed that, like George Shaw, there were several injection sites on his body that could not be explained. Also, like George, the areas surrounding these injection marks tested positive for insulin. The new autopsy report stated that these findings were suspicious for unprescribed exogenous insulin administration. The investigators looking into these suspicious deaths had told George and Archie's families that numerous deaths of veterans at the Johnson Medical Center were being re-examined. The scale of the problem was not made known to the public until August of 2019, when the daughter of another veteran treated at Johnson Medical Center submitted a statement of claim to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Felix Kirk McDermott was a veteran of the Vietnam War. He had retired from the United States Army with the rank of sergeant and then went on to work as a truck driver and to serve in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. His daughter, Melanie, described him in 2021 as a proud Army veteran, an ornery character who would give anybody a helping hand. 82-year-old Kirk had been admitted to Johnson Medical Center on April 6, 2018, because he was suffering from pneumonia. He had physical impairment that had been brought on by a stroke. His health initially improved following his admission to the hospital, but on the morning of April 9th, he suddenly began experiencing shortness of breath. Blood tests showed that his blood sugar was critically and profoundly low, according to the later claim. Medical staff could not raise his blood sugar, and Kirk passed away around 9 o'clock that morning. Hospital staff never explained to Kirk's family that he had experienced an unexplained hypoglycemic event. Several months later, Kirk's family was contacted and finally notified that he may not have died as the result of natural causes. His remains were disinterred and taken to Dover Air Force Base to be examined. Again, unexplained injection marks were found on his body, and testing showed that he had been injected with insulin at these sites. Kirk did not have diabetes and had never been prescribed insulin. The deputy medical examiner who performed the autopsy ruled that his death had been a homicide. Someone had intentionally injected him with insulin for the purpose of killing him. When Kirk's family was first notified that his death was being considered as potentially suspicious, they were also told that 9 or 10 other veterans had been killed under similar suspicious circumstances on that floor of that hospital prior to his death. This would be a major issue described in the claim Kirk's family would later file against the Veterans Administration. If the medical examiner's conclusion is correct, Felix Kirk McDermott was murdered while he was in the care and custody of the Lewis A. Johnson VA Medical Center, despite the VAMC being on notice of the previous wrongful injections, according to the attorney representing Kirk's daughter. Despite there being evidence that someone was murdering veterans at the hospital had done nothing to stop them. allowing an increasing number of people to be murdered. It would ultimately be determined that potentially as many as 20 murders using unauthorized insulin injections were committed at the hospital over a nearly year-long period between July of 2017 and June of 2018. By the time Melanie and her family filed their claim, a person of interest was identified in the early days of the investigation, which began in June of 2018, nearly a year after the deaths began. In those previous 11 months, various members of the staff had discussed amongst themselves how strange it was that elderly men kept having these episodes in the early morning hours with no medical explanation, but no one reported their concerns, even when the deaths began occurring much more frequently in the early months of 2018. In June of 2018, a doctor only publicly identified as Hospitalist B finally met with the hospital's associate chief of staff after speaking with other physicians about their patients. According to a later report, the associate chief of staff's attitude exemplified the response of most employees, that the events were likely medically based and that there was no need to report. Hospitalist B insisted that something was going on, and it was potentially criminal. On June 28th, the Veterans Affairs Office of the Investigator General was contacted. The FBI joined the investigation the next day, and the U.S. Attorney General's office joined a week later. An extensive investigation into deaths that occurred at the hospital was required, but investigators at first looked at 8 cases doctors had initially identified in hopes of quickly identifying a person of interest and preventing them from harming any more patients. They soon realized that only 3 of the hospital's employees had been working at the times just before the suspicious hypoglycemic events occurred. Only one of these employees worked on floor 3A, where all of the suspicious deaths had occurred. Electronic records confirmed that the other 2 employees had been in other areas of the hospital at the times in question. This left one potential person of interest. This individual remained an employee of the hospital for the time being, but was removed from patient care on July 5, 2018. They were terminated from the hospital in March of 2019 based on dishonest answers they had provided during interviews related to the investigation. The person of interest was 46-year-old Rita Mae. She was never taken into custody until July 14, 2020, 2 years after the investigation began. She was finally taken into custody that day after she appeared in federal court to plead guilty to 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to commit murder. The assault charge stemmed from the death of Russell R. Posey, a 92-year-old Navy veteran who served during World War II. While Mays admitted to injecting him with insulin, prosecutors did not believe that they had sufficient medical evidence to prove that the injection directly caused his death in court. While there were approximately 20 deaths deemed suspicious during the investigation, prosecutors ultimately concluded that they could not prove May's involvement to a sufficient legal standard to bring charges in connection to all of them. In addition to George, Archie, and Kirk, Mays also confessed to murdering 4 other veterans by injecting them with insulin while they were in the hospital. 82-year-old Robert Edge Sr. was a veteran of the United States Navy. He would later be described by his family as a kind and gentle man who could build almost anything, which helped him always find work when he returned home after serving during the Korean War. 96-year-old William Holloway served in the United States Army during World War II. He had signed up for the Army before he had even turned 18, which meant he had to obtain permission from his father in order to enlist. Robert Lee Kozel Sr., 89, served in the United States Army from 1951 until 1953. He was stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky with the 11th Airborne Division as a field artillery parachutist. He loved music and was an active member of his church. He was skilled at fixing things and passed his skills on to his 2 sons. He was the proud grandfather of 3 grandchildren. According to his family, he loved to dance, to sing, and to play his harmonica. On Christmas Day of 2017, he learned that he was going to be a great-grandfather, and his happiness at the news brought him to tears. He never got to meet his great-grandchild because Rita Mae killed him just over a month later. 88-year-old Raymond Golden served in the United States Army from 1951 until 1953, and in the United States Air Force from 1955 until 1973. He went on to become a mail carrier. He was survived by his wife, 2 children, and 5 grandchildren. In addition to spending time with his friends and family, he enjoyed bowling, fishing, and woodworking. Rita Mae was, like all of her victims, a veteran. She served in the Army National Guard from November 2000 to April 2001, and then again from February 2003 until May of 2004, during which time she was deployed to Iraq and Kuwait, where she worked in a non-combat position repairing chemical equipment. She was discharged from the National Guard in October of 2006 following her final duty assignment with the Guard's 115th Engineer Company in Clarksburg. Mae was hired as a nursing assistant at Johnson Medical Center in 2015 and assigned to work the night shift on Floor 3A of the Medical Surgical Unit. A later investigation into the hospital would reveal numerous failings that had allowed Mae to murder so many patients. The first of these errors occurred when Mae was hired. Prior to working at the VA hospital, Mae had been employed for 3 years at a group home for adults with disabilities. During this time, she went from an entry-level position as a caregiver to a residential manager who supervised 15 employees. She left the group home for the job at the hospital under good terms, according to the parent company of the home. However, her job prior to working as a caregiver was at the North Central Regional Jail. She worked as a corrections officer there from August of 2005 until September of 2012. While in this position, inmates accused her of using excessive force. She and several other corrections officers were named in a 2013 lawsuit, which claimed she had kicked and helped restrain an inmate so that another officer could stomp on his head. Mae then allegedly spat in the inmate's face, cursed at him, and threatened him. Mae and her co-defendants all denied that they had used excessive force, and a federal judge dismissed the lawsuit. The Johnson Medical Center was not aware of these allegations because they had failed to perform the complete background and employment checks required for her position in a facility run by a federal agency. Had they learned about the excessive force allegations, she most likely would not have been hired in a patient care position, and the hospital would have had grounds for terminating Mae during her probationary employment period, which ended in September of 20 employment period, which ended in September of 2016, months before the first murder. The hospital had another opportunity to learn of these allegations when Mae was nominated for Nursing Assistant of the Year by her supervisor in December of 2016. The award was one of the VA Secretary's Awards for Excellence in Nursing. And since the award would be signed by the Secretary of the Veterans Administration and came with a $500 prize, its recipients were required to undergo a security check before receiving it. Mae was given the award, but the person responsible for performing the security check marked it as complete and having a favorable outcome without actually completing it. Mae received the award in September of 2017, just months after she committed her first murder. Mae worked as a nursing assistant, which meant that she did not have the training necessary for her to work in a medical position. Her job mainly entailed assisting patients with basic daily tasks like eating and bathing, monitoring vital signs, and sitting with patients who required constant supervision. Mae had been the nursing assistant assigned to sit with several of the murdered men just prior to their initial unexplained hypoglycemic events, a fact which increased authorities' suspicions that she was the person responsible for the deaths. Mae was interviewed by investigators 3 times. She spent much of her first interview complaining about her job and how she was often asked to work in other areas of the hospital or perform tasks that she felt were below her position. She denied any involvement in the suspicious deaths. However, hospital technology records show that immediately after the first interview, Mae returned to her workstation and began looking for a new job. While investigators felt that Mae was the most likely perpetrator in the case because she was the only person who had the access to commit all of the murders, their case against her was entirely circumstantial. The hospital pharmacy did not use the Veterans Administration mandated system to track its medication inventory, and supply rooms and medication carts were not locked. There were no security cameras covering common areas, including the rooms where medications were stored, so there were no records of Mae taking the insulin or security footage showing her in the areas where it was stored. This means that Mae had the opportunity to take the insulin without being caught, but it also meant that there was no evidence that she had. Since investigators did not have any of the actual insulin bottles or syringes used in the murders, they also did not have any fingerprints or other physical evidence tying Mae to the insulin. The investigation, therefore, went on for 2 more years despite the almost immediate identification of Mae as the prime suspect. Circumstantial evidence against her continued to pile up. Examination of her social media accounts found posts complaining about her patients and making jokes about medically restraining them despite the fact that Mays was not authorized to administer medications. In Facebook messages, she complained about having to deliver medications doctors used as they fought to save George Shaw's life. A search of her internet history showed that Mays had researched female serial killers and the number of victims they each had, and that she watched a series on Netflix called Nurses Who Kill. While this activity does not indicate criminal activity, one of the episodes of the show was about a nurse who killed patients using insulin, proving that Mays, who did not have any medical education, would have known that insulin could be used to kill someone. Mays was married, but her husband was incarcerated on child pornography charges during the investigation. She would call him almost every morning after returning home from her night shift, and their phone calls were recorded. The morning after one of the unexplained hypoglycemic events, Mays complained to her husband about the patient she had been assigned to sit with during her shift and how she had wanted to strangle him. In another call, she complained about her arms being sore from doing compressions while trying to help revive one of her victims. She was upset that the previously stable patient's family had not signed a do not resuscitate order. Since there was no order on file, when the patient had experienced an unexplained hypoglycemic event the week before, the hospital staff had used all available measures to save his life. She told her husband that the patient would have just fallen asleep and not woken up when his blood sugar level dropped to 30 if they had just done nothing, a statement that authorities found odd from someone without any formal medical education. Mays spent hours with investigators during her 2 subsequent interviews, but she largely shut down during both of them, with recordings of these interviews consisting largely of silence as investigators waited for responses from Mays, as they offered to help her if she explained what had happened. Mays did acknowledge during the 3rd interview that the evidence was pointing towards her as the person who had killed the patients. After this 3rd interview, Mays went to the courthouse in order to fill out an affidavit requesting a court-appointed attorney. However, she was eligible for one since at the time, she had not been charged with a crime and investigators had not named her in a target letter. Once they learned that Mays had made this trip to the courthouse, investigators decided that she may be more willing to speak with them once she had legal representation. They issued a target letter stating that they believed she had committed several crimes, which allowed her to be assigned 3 court-appointed attorneys in the following weeks. Mays and her attorneys then began the process of negotiating a deal in which she would plead guilty to the murders and the assault charge that authorities believed they had the evidence to successfully prove in court. The families of the victims were all consulted and they agreed to Mays pleading guilty rather than going to trial. Mays was sentenced on May 11, 2021. At the sentencing hearing, her lawyers asked the judge to sentence her to 30 years in prison, a sentence at the lower end of sentencing guidelines for the crimes she had pleaded guilty to. In justifying this request, they pointed to Mays' difficult childhood and her post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, which stemmed from a sexual assault she suffered while in the military. May herself addressed the court, saying, "I don't ask anyone for forgiveness because I don't think I could forgive anyone for doing what I did. I can only say that I'm sorry for the pain I caused the families and my family." Numerous family members of Mays' victims watched the sentencing hearing, either in person or over video conference. Many of them spoke about their loved ones and the impact their loss had on their families prior to the judge announcing the sentence. "Growing up, he was my hero," Robert Edge Jr. said of his father, Robert Edge Sr. "He took care of me when I was little, and when it was time for me to take care of him, you took that away from me." Addressing Mays, Melanie Proctor, daughter of Kirk McDermott, said, "You took some of the greatest men of our time and preyed on them when they were at their weakest, and for that, you are a coward." U.S. District Judge Thomas Klee was not moved by Mays' lawyers' request for leniency. He regularly saw individuals in his courtroom who had difficult childhoods in rural West Virginia, as well as veterans who all too commonly suffer from PTSD. He told Mays, "But you're not special. None of these folks are killers, let alone serial killers." Judge Klee went on to say to Mays several times, "Your counsel made the point that you shouldn't be considered a monster. Respectfully, I disagree with that. You are the worst kind. You're the monster that no one sees coming." He sentenced Mays to 7 life sentences, 1 for each murder, plus 20 years for the assault charge. The judge did recommend that Mays serve her sentence at Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, as requested by her lawyers, because the facility offers specialized mental health treatment for inmates. However, Mays was ultimately sent to Federal Correctional Institution Aliceville, a low-security facility in Alabama, to serve her sentence instead. While Mays' victims received justice, the loved ones they left behind were still without answers. Mays did not speak of her motive for the murders in court during her initial plea or at her sentencing. Mays did speak with investigators following her guilty pleas being formally entered, and she claimed that two different motives led her to commit the murders, although the first reason she provided was clearly a lie meant to make her look better. Mays claimed that she believed she was being merciful by ending her victims' lives and allowing them to pass gently. However, none of her victims had been in danger of dying before she injected them with insulin. They were all expected to survive whatever had brought them to the hospital. Most of their conditions had improved while they were being cared for in the hospital, and some of them were very close to being discharged. Mays injecting these men with insulin did not save them from a painful death. It instead inflicted one upon them. The effects the injections had on the veterans were horrifying. The hypoglycemic events Mays caused resulted in her victims spending hours or days suffering from their side effects. Records show that her victims experienced agitation, loss of motor control, cold sweats, difficulty breathing, and a variety of other severe symptoms as a result of her injecting them with insulin. Furthermore, Mays injected some of her victims on multiple different occasions when the medical intervention meant to stabilize their blood sugar was working and their health was once again improving. The other reason Mays provided for her crimes was the sense of control it gave her when she was experiencing chaos in her personal life and at her job. Unlike her claims of trying to be merciful, this motive at least appears to have some basis in reality. Mays's husband was incarcerated on child pornography charges at the time of her crimes, and she had voiced displeasure at the menial tasks she was expected to perform as a nursing assistant. She had also previously complained about having to work with patients suffering from dementia, a condition which some of her victims have been diagnosed with. While Rita Mae was prevented from causing further harm to patients, the question of how she had been able to kill so many people over an extended period of time without detection remained. According to Veterans Affairs Inspector General Michael J. Missel, while responsibility for these heinous criminal acts lies with Rita Mae, an extensive healthcare inspection by our office found the facility had serious and pervasive clinical and administrative failures that contributed to them going undetected. On the day Mays was sentenced, the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General released a 100-page report detailing the various failures at the Johnson Medical Center that Mays had been able to exploit. Medication storage and inventory management was a major concern. Improper storage and inventory reporting had allowed Mays to obtain insulin unchecked when she had no reason to have access to any medication as part of her duties, because she did not have the licenses that would allow her to administer it. These failures further prevented the hospital from noticing the excessive amounts of drugs used to counteract insulin being used at the hospital and investigating the unusual need for the drug. Each individual case of unexplained hypoglycemia should have merited concern even without a pattern being identified. Dr. Diane Krieger, who later consulted with investigators, stated that in her more than 30 years of practice, she had never seen blood sugar levels as low as she saw in the records of the cases of unexplained hypoglycemia she examined as part of her work on the case. According to her, even diabetics rarely have their blood sugar drop below 30, and some of Mays's victims had readings as low as 5 after she injected them with high doses of insulin. Testing was not performed to determine the cause of the unexplained hypoglycemic events experienced by 7 of Mays's confirmed victims, and when George Shaw's family insisted on further testing, doctors ordered the wrong test. Other failures involved hospital staff, training, and technology. The employee responsible for patient safety did not train staff about what sorts of incidents needed to be reported. The hospital computer system did not always enter overnight blood sugar readings into patient charts for their doctors to review the following morning. The report identified missed opportunities at every level of leadership at the hospital that could have ended Rita Mae's crime spree. The report made 14 recommendations to improve patient safety at Johnson Medical Center. The Veterans Administration claimed that all of the recommendations would be implemented by March of 2022. By the time of Mae's sentencing in May of 2021, the Veterans Administration had reached tentative financial settlements with the families of her victims. The payouts have so far totaled more than $5 million. The money has not eased the pain the families feel over the loss of their loved ones or at the failings of the hospital their loved ones. 2. According to Kirk McDermott's daughter, Melanie Proctor, "I'm always going to feel guilty about this. I thought I had my dad someplace safe." On September 24, 2021, the tantrums of 3-year-old Arley Doe took a tragic turn when her family subjected her to an exorcism. Her cries were contained within the walls of a small Pentecostal church, Iglesia Apostolici Profetis, in San Jose, California. Arley took her last breath during a terrifying attempt to cast out a supposed demon, orchestrated by her mother, Claudia Hernandez Santos, her uncle, Rene Aaron Hernandez Santos, and her grandfather, Rene Trigueros Hernandez. As prosecutors investigate this heartbreaking case, they reveal the chilling details of a fatal church exorcism that sent shockwaves through the community. With accusations firmly directed at all 3 family members, the legal proceedings seek to deliver justice for little Arley. Investigators spent months unraveling the roles of each family member: mother, uncle, and grandfather, each contributing to the tragedy that claimed this innocent child's life. Arley was denied the protection she deserved from those closest to her. Did she receive the justice she needed? Let's find out. San Jose, California, is known for its museums, gardens, and historic architecture. As of the 2023 census, San Jose is home to 930,862 people from diverse backgrounds. In the past 5 years, the crime rate has risen significantly. While it is often regarded as one of the safest large cities in America, the crime rate per 100,000 people now exceeds the average of 316.3. However, this incident was particularly isolated. In the name of religion, a young life was tragically cut short. Nestled within its quiet streets, the Iglesia Apostolici Profetis, a seemingly ordinary Pentecostal church, became the center of a horrifying crime in September 2021. Inside this unassuming church, a distressing exorcism unfolded, forever marking its walls with the dark echoes of 3-year-old Arley Doe's tragic fate. The Hernandez family included 25-year-old Claudia Alicia Hernandez, the victim's mother, alongside her uncle, Rene Hernandez Santos, and grandfather, Rene Hernandez Sr., both implicated in the exorcism that led to the child's untimely death. Not much is known about the victim's uncle or father. The family's spiritual journey unfolded within the confines of Iglesia Apostolici Profetis, a small Pentecostal church where Arley's grandfather, identified as the leader of the church and a certified pastor, played a prominent role. The family's occupations beyond their religious roles remain undisclosed. Claudia, the mother, handled a YouTube channel where she shared her live videos. But one fact that was certain was that they were extremely religious. It was their religious affiliations that led them to the tragic belief that the child was possessed that resulted in such an end. On September 24, 2021, a dark chapter unfolded in the life of this 3-year-old child as her family's misguided attempt to exorcise what they believed to be an evil spirit led to a day of unimaginable horror. The events that transpired on this fateful day would later become the focal point of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. It all started when Arley woke the night before and began screaming periodically. Arley's mother, Claudia Alicia Hernandez Santos, believed that the tantrum of her child was the work of evil forces and took her to the church to perform an exorcism. Claudia, in an attempt to perform an exorcism, put her finger down Arley's throat several times. Even though Arley was being subjected to so much pain, she fell asleep several times in between out of exhaustion. She was being held down by her uncle and grandfather. They held her by the neck, resulting in asphyxiation. According to Claudia, Arley's vomit was purple in color. The 2-hour-long ceremony ended in tragedy. However, the family didn't attempt to seek any medical help for almost 2 hours after she had passed away. After almost 2 hours, Claudia called the police shortly after 8 p.m. to report her daughter's lifeless state. Responding to the call, the authorities arrived at the Iglesia Apostolici Profetis Church in San Jose, a place that would forever be etched in infamy. There, they discovered little Arley, unconscious on the floor, initiating a harrowing sequence of events that unfolded over the next few hours. Arley was subjected to relentless physical abuse, lost consciousness, and displayed signs of trauma with injuries around her eyes, face, neck, and chest. The family's disturbing belief in demonic possession led to a prolonged ordeal for the young girl, lasting approximately 12 hours. When paramedics finally arrived 2 hours later, they found her lifeless body on the church floor, marking the end of a day filled with torment and anguish. The affidavit filed in Santa Clara County Superior Court revealed that Arley's mother, Claudia, believed her daughter had died between 6 and 6:30 p.m. The family's distorted perception of spirituality and the misguided belief in their ability to expel evil through abusive practices cast a dark shadow over Arley's final moments. The investigation into the tragic death of Arley unfolded as a chilling tale of religious fervor gone awry, leading to a horrific exorcism performed by her own family members, her mother, uncle, and grandfather. The subsequent legal proceedings shed light on the shocking details of the whole 12-hour ordeal that culminated in Arley's death inside the confines of the small Pentecostal church, Iglesia Apostoli y Profetas, located in San Jose, California. The investigative process took a significant turn when Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeffrey Rosen filed court documents seeking to consolidate the cases of all 3 family members into a single trial. The rationale behind this request was rooted in the assertion that each defendant played a reprehensible role in the violence inflicted upon Arley, making it challenging to determine individual responsibility for specific injuries. The court documents revealed the disturbing timeline of events that unfolded on September 24, 2021. Arley's mother, 25-year-old Claudia Hernandez Santos, initiated the tragic sequence of events by calling the police to report her daughter's lifeless state. The authorities arrived at the Pentecostal church discovering Arley unconscious on the floor, a scene that would later be confirmed as the result of a homicide caused by suffocation and smothering. The investigation uncovered harrowing details of the family's collective actions during the 12-hour exorcism attempt. Prosecutors contended that all 3 defendants, Arley's mother, uncle, and grandfather, actively participated in physically abusing the young girl. At various points during the ordeal, each family member held Arley at different parts of her body, with one gripping her neck, another her abdomen, and the third holding her legs. The alleged attempt to induce vomiting involved a disturbing collaboration of efforts. A preliminary autopsy later confirmed that Arley's death was a result of homicide, with asphyxia due to suffocation identified as the cause. The alarming details emerged as investigators delved into the disturbing circumstances surrounding the little girl's demise. According to court documents, the family, gripped by the belief that Arley was possessed by a demon, engaged in a twisted form of prayer and exorcism at the church. Arley's mother, in an attempt to rid her daughter of the perceived evil spirit, resorted to distressing methods. She allegedly attempted to induce vomiting by sticking her fingers down Arley's throat and squeezing her neck, actions that escalated as the day went on. The investigation revealed a disturbing lack of care for Arley's basic needs leading up to her death. The affidavit stated that the victim last ate on Thursday, September 23rd, around 9 p.m., and was provided with only about 6 ounces of water from Thursday until the time of her death. The coroner's findings further emphasized the extent of Arley's suffering, revealing injuries to her face and neck, as well as blunt force injuries across her chest and back. Internal bleeding added another layer of brutality to the acts committed by her own family members. As the investigation unfolded, the family members faced charges of child abuse, including assault on a child with force likely to cause great bodily injury resulting in death. The legal proceedings brought attention to the distorted beliefs that fueled the family's actions, the misguided conviction that Arley was possessed by a demon, and that a religious ritual could expel this perceived evil. The court documents delved into individual statements made by each defendant during police interviews. Arley's grandfather, the self-proclaimed pastor of Iglesia Apostoli y Profetas, provided varying accounts of the events leading to the young girl's death. His changing narratives between September may raise suspicions about the accuracy of his statements and hinted at potential inconsistencies or attempts to obfuscate the truth. Similarly, Arley's uncle, Rene Aaron Hernandez Santos, significantly altered his initial account during subsequent interviews with the police. The evolving nature of his statement suggested a lack of transparency and prompted further scrutiny of the circumstances surrounding the exorcism. If convicted, Claudia Alicia Hernandez faces an exceptionally severe sentence of 25 years to life in prison. The investigation unfolded against the backdrop of a disturbing trend: increased demand for exorcisms driven by a confluence of factors such as poverty, anxiety, and a lack of trust in conventional institutions. The tragic case of Arley Doe served as a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in the intersection of religious fervor and unchecked beliefs. As the legal proceedings progressed, the call for a consolidated trial underscored the complexity of assigning individual culpability for a crime committed collaboratively. The family's statements and actions, as revealed through the investigation, provide a chilling insight into their perspective on the events surrounding the young girl's death. The family's narrative begins with Arley's mother, Claudia Hernandez Santos, expressing her belief that her daughter was possessed by an evil spirit. According to statements provided to police, Arley would periodically wake up at night crying or screaming, which fueled the family's conviction that she was under the influence of a demonic force. In response to these perceived manifestations, Claudia attempted to perform what she described as an exorcism to rid Arley of the alleged evil spirit. Claudia's involvement in the exorcism took a disturbing turn as she detailed the methods she employed in a rather matter-of-fact manner. First responders who arrived at the scene observed bruising around the child's eyes, neck, and chest. Claudia admitted that they waited for 2 hours before finally calling 911. Subsequent interviews with investigators revealed Claudia's evolving beliefs about Arley's possession. Claudia and her uncle reportedly prayed for Arley while inside a bedroom. The events escalated the following morning when Claudia and her uncle drove Arley to the Iglesia Apostolici Prophetas, a small Pentecostal church. The family still held the belief that Arley was under demonic control. The family believed she had died between 6 and 6:30 p.m., around 12 hours after arriving at the church. According to Arley's father, they had to perform the ceremony to liberate her of her evil spirits. The details about the exorcism weren't revealed, however. It was stated that Arley was asleep when they reached the church. He also added, "If you read the Bible, you'll see that Jesus cast away demons and made sick people healthy again," he told the newspaper. "It's not when I want to do it. It's when God, in His will, wants to heal the person. The preacher is like an instrument of God. What we do is what God says." In the aftermath of Arley's death, Claudia set up a GoFundMe campaign to solicit donations for burial expenses. The family's deep-rooted religious convictions were evident in Claudia's Instagram profile description, which included a reference to Isaiah chapter 55 verse 8 through 11, a Bible verse about finding strength during difficult times. Arley's mother added another layer to the investigation through YouTube videos she uploaded, providing insights into her perspective on her daughter's death. In these videos, Claudia did not accept blame for the alleged exorcism or her daughter's demise. Instead, she attributed Arley's death to a divine act, asserting that God took her and expressing gratitude that her daughter would not have to face the hardships of the world. In a bizarre turn of events, a YouTube video surfaced in January, for months after Arley's passing, featuring Claudia Hernandez discussing her daughter's death. The 40-minute self-shot video titled with Arley's full name offers a haunting glimpse into Hernandez's demeanor as she addresses the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Hernandez's statements in the video attempt to provide her perspective on the situation, asserting that only those present truly understand what transpired. She acknowledges the negative perceptions surrounding her and the circumstances of her daughter's death, but emphasizes her inability to change the past. Hernandez expresses gratitude that her daughter is no longer suffering in a world she perceives as increasingly challenging and deteriorating. As a matter of fact, the video becomes a poignant exploration of Hernandez's emotions, revealing the pain of losing a child juxtaposed with moments of apparent attachment. She reflects on the joy of being a mother, acknowledging the sadness, tears, and longing for her daughter. The complex emotional landscape painted in the video adds another layer of intricacy to an already deeply tragic narrative. 6 days after the YouTube video was uploaded, prosecutors formally charged Hernandez. The gravity of these charges, coupled with the perceived disconnect between Hernandez's demeanor in the video and the alleged actions leading to Arley's death, underscores the complexity of the case. The family's association with Iglesia Apostolici Prophetas took a darker turn as the church was linked to another incident, an alleged kidnapping involving individuals associated with the church. Professor Alison Cavey, an expert in the history of magic, science, and religion, provided valuable insights into the broader context of exorcisms. She highlighted the increasing prevalence of exorcisms in both the United States and Latin America over the last 5 to 7 years. KV pointed out challenges stemming from the Catholic Church's lack of preparation for priests to perform exorcisms, leading to a demand that is not met by qualified individuals. She also identified societal factors such as poverty, anxiety, and a lack of trust in conventional institutions for education as driving forces behind the demand for exorcisms. KV emphasized that when people choose supernatural explanations, like demonic possession, it often stems from dissatisfaction with natural explanations, providing comfort without the burden of blame or responsibility. In the case of Arley's family, the tragic events unfolded against the backdrop of a desperate attempt to solve a problem they may not have fully understood, attributing it to supernatural forces. It's alarming how the family didn't express any form of guilt or sorrow even after Arley's loss. The YouTube video recorded by Claudia before her arrest offered a glimpse into her emotional journey from the excitement of pregnancy to the profound grief of losing her daughter. Her sentiments reflected the difficulty of accepting a child's loss due to illness, pushing individuals to seek solace in supernatural explanations. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Claudia Alicia Hernandez Santos faced charges of felony, assault on a child with force likely to produce great bodily injury resulting in death. Her arrest, which occurred on January 31, 2022, highlighted the severity of the crimes committed during that fateful exorcism. The day of horror marked by religious fervor gone awry not only claimed the life of a young child, but also brought to light the dangerous intersection of misguided beliefs and heinous actions. The tragic case of Arley Doe came to an end when her mother, Claudia Alicia Hernandez, was charged with felony assault on a child with force likely to produce great bodily injury. The severity of the allegations prompted prosecutors to emphasize the extreme nature of the actions she's accused of committing against her own daughter. The decision to deny bail was motivated by concerns over public safety and the assessment that Hernandez presented a high flight risk. Prosecutors pointed out her minimal ties to the community, coupled with her birthplace in El Salvador, as factors contributing to the perceived risk. This precautionary measure underscores the severity of the accusations against Hernandez and the potential dangers she may pose if released pending trial. The disturbing details of the case were brought to public attention through newly uncovered court documents, as neither the San Jose Police Department nor the District Attorney's Office had initially disclosed information about the harrowing homicide. The investigative process aimed to unravel the circumstances surrounding Arley's death, with Hernandez emerging as the sole individual arrested in connection to the case. The legal proceedings will continue to unfold, scrutinizing the evidence, witness testimonies, and the chilling details revealed in the court documents. Anyways, as the justice system navigates the intricacies of this case, the focus will remain on seeking accountability for the actions that led to the tragic loss of Arley's life. The proceedings will unfold with a commitment to ensuring justice for the young victim and holding those responsible accountable for the alleged heinous acts that cut short a promising and innocent life. As we wrap up our investigation into the disturbing incidents surrounding Iglesia Apostolici Prophetas in San Jose, the web of tragedy and criminality continues to unravel. The revelations of a deadly exorcism and a shocking baby kidnapping have cast a dark shadow over this church community. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.